I'm just going to give another minute or so for some people to join. And apologies if nobody can see me, having some technical difficulties with the camera, so you get my lovely picture today instead of me. I'm just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, so hi everybody. My name is Michael and I'm an Enterprise Customer Success Manager with Jotform. Thank you all for joining me in another installment of our Lunch and Learn series. Today, we'll be reviewing conditional logic and how it can be used to make your forms more dynamic, intelligent, streamlined, and efficient. After we review the basics of conditional logic, we'll explore each type a bit more in depth and review a couple forms that implement the conditions in various ways. We'll also discuss some best practices when working with and setting up certain conditions. While we'll examine a few potential use cases today, later this season, I'll build on these fundamentals with another discussion on logic. During that session, we'll take a look at some more advanced use cases around widgets, input tables, and form calculation values. Before we dive in, I wanted to let you know that the enterprise server we are working in today is not HIPAA enabled. While conditional logic can absolutely be used with a HIPAA compliant server, there may be some additional processes and setup involved in order to fully take advantage of this feature. If you have any specific questions regarding HIPAA compliance, please contact our support team for further assistance. As per usual, we're going to be covering a lot in this video, so it will be recorded and we'll reserve some time towards the end of the presentation for questions. As I mentioned earlier, today we'll be reviewing the various types of conditional logic, including showing and hiding fields, calculating and copying values, making fields required, enabled, disabled, or input masked, changing the thank you page or redirecting to another page entirely, as well as changing when an email sends or who receives an email. After reviewing some of the basics around each type of logic, we'll take a bit of a deeper dive into how each condition type could be used to enhance the experience for form submitters or help automate processes that occur post-submission. As we explore each condition, we'll discuss some how-tos, general tips, and best practices to consider when adding conditions to your forms. All right, so let's take a look at our first form here. So I have a form with just some basic fields added to it. I have varying field types because we're going to explore the conditions a little bit and how some of the conditions change depending on the field type being used. So the available conditions, kind of like I mentioned in the recap a second ago, are the show hide field, which allows you to show or hide a field as it sounds. The update calculate field, which either sets the value of a field through conditions or inputting text of some kind, or copying a value from one field to another. The enable require mask field. So this allows you to make a field read only or take a read only field and make it editable or input mask a field all conditionally. If you have a multi-page form, you could hide pages or skip pages. If you want to redirect to another page, or if you want to show a different thank you page based off of conditions on the form, you can. And then there's the change email recipient, which is a little bit more powerful than the name would suggest. Not only can it change who receives an email, but it could also change when an email sends or if it even sends altogether. If we break down the actual portions of the condition, so we have the if portion, which is going to be based around the question on the form. So you're basically saying, like, which question are you checking in this condition? The state is the state of that field. If we look at a name field, all I get is empty or is filled. But if I look at something like a short text, I have a lot more options. I have it's equal to, is not equal to, contains, does not contain, start with, doesn't start with, ends with, or doesn't end with, in addition to is empty or is filled. And if we look at a number field, I lose some of that option around contains, but I get greater than or less than. And then if we look at something like a drop down or single choice or multi-choice, we get is equal to, not equal to, empty or filled. So depending on the type of field that you're using in your condition, you might see different options for the state. The value is just going to simply be the value that you're checking for. This could be like a hard value, like say greater than 5 or less than 5. Or if you're using a dropdown, it could be one of the options that you could choose from. The do portion is going to be the action that occurs. So if I'm saying show this name field if the dropdown is equal to option A, one thing to keep in mind is that the opposite will happen until this condition is met. So if I look at this form, even though I'm not hiding the name field on the form itself, if I look at it in the builder, until I choose option A, that name field is hidden. And if I choose a different option other than A, because I don't have any conditions set up for that, I'm not going to see that name field. So it's important to consider when setting up your logic that the opposite will occur until that logic is met. So let's start by taking a look at the show hide field option, which I just kind of touched on a little bit. There's two primary ways to hide a field on a form. You could hide it in the builder, kind of like I've done here for every question below this, would you like to add another reference? Or you can conditionally hide it. If you choose to conditionally hide, again, keep in mind that the opposite will happen, just like I mentioned, until that condition is met. So that's always one thing to consider. The way I've set up this form is that it requires some personal information from the submitter and at least one reference, which is why all these fields are required. The other references are optional, and then the sign and date is going to be shown later. One thing to note is that all of these hidden fields are required. You can make hidden fields required, and as long as they're not visible at the time that the submitter is trying to submit the form, the required rule will be ignored because the fields aren't visible. So they'll only be required if they're visible. So you can have required fields that are hidden and still be allowed to submit the form if your conditional logic is never showing those fields. And if we look at the way that the conditions on this form are set up, there's a few different ones that we're using. So we're hiding the submit button until somebody signs the form. Now, the signature field is required, so they already couldn't submit without signing it. But this just gives an extra level of security to make sure that they don't even have that submit button presented to them until somebody signs the form. Uh, Conditions 2 through 5 are all pretty similar. It's basically saying if the information required for the reference is filled, then show the button that would ask if they want to add another reference. And then the final condition is using the any rule, whereas these conditions are using the all rule. So nothing will happen until all of these are met. The final condition is basically saying if the last contact number is filled for the third reference, or if either of the two questions where we ask if they'd like to add another reference is equal to no, then show the signing portion of the form. This one uses the any rule because we don't need all of these to match. We're just looking for any of these to happen. So if we look at the actual functionality of the form, I can fill it out with the required information. And then if I add contact information, as soon as I add all of the required fields for that first reference, I get this question that asks if I would like to add another one. If I say yes, I can go ahead and continue to fill out these references. And if I say yes again, this is where the first part of that any condition will come in. As soon as I add the contact number here, I get my sign and date. And when I sign, I can go ahead and submit. If I change either of these values to no, the condition will still be met and I can still sign and date here. For our next form, we're going to look at the calculate or copy value condition. So in this one, we're going to take a value from earlier in the form and copy it later in the form. This just allows somebody to register for an event and then also receive a free t-shirt and then put in some information for shipping of where they would like the shirt sent to. If we look at the logic that's set up, we're using the terms and condition widget as a way to create a labelless checkbox. So if I come back here, you'll see this widget, and this was talked about in our last session on widgets, but you don't have to put terms and conditions in there. So this allows me to just create a labelless checkbox without any type of label up here. And the condition is basically saying if that terms and condition is filled, then copy the address from the first page to the address on the second page. So if we look at the functionality of that form, if I fill it out and enter my address, and then choose to use the same shipping address, I can just simply check this box and the value will be copied here, so I don't have to enter it again. If I don't want to use the same shipping address or change my mind, I can just simply unclick it and update this with whatever address I would like to add. For the next form, I have set up a basic quiz asking some sports questions. One thing to point out with this form is that it's actually using calculation values. I'm not going to dive too far into the setup of that because I will cover that in the next session, kind of like I mentioned earlier. But that is something being used as a way to set up this quiz. And like I said, we'll go more in depth to that part of it next time. But the way this quiz works is it has multiple sections and then some hidden fields in each section where we're calculating a score and then saying if they pass or failed that section. And then we're just going to calculate a total score and then give a comment based off of whether or not they passed the entire quiz or failed the entire quiz. One thing to note with the pass-fail section is that I'm actually inserting a default value of fail. This means that I don't have to create additional conditions saying to insert fail if this score isn't met. I only have to create conditions saying if the score is high enough, overwrite the default value of failed with the value of pass. If you aren't familiar with setting default values, if you go to the advanced tab of like a short text field or really any field type, you could set that default value here. Since this field is ultimately going to be hidden and not seen by the user, the default value doesn't really matter because they're not going to know that fail is inserted rather than just having no value in there. And if we look at some of the conditions set up here, so on these first ones where it's just looking for a score, I'm actually using the any rule to say is greater than or equal to, but you could also just say is greater than 1 if you don't want to set it up this way. I just wanted to be able to show the use of the any rule, which is basically saying if the score is greater than 2 or equal to 2, overwrite that default value of fail with a text value of pass. So again, you can insert text values. It doesn't just have to be a numeric value that you're using in this condition. We're also doing some calculations. This could again be done with the form calculation widget, but you can also calculate values conditionally. So in this case, I'm actually looking for all of these answers to be filled before actually running my calculation for any of the scores. And this condition is basically just repeated multiple times for each section. And then the total score is, again, just looking for all of the questions to be answered because all of those scores are already tallied for each individual section, and then giving a total score. The final two conditions are just setting that default text for the long text field based off of the total score for the entire form. So if it's less than 6, there's a failing statement. If it's greater than or equal to 6, again, could just set it as greater than 5. It's a passing statement. And because all of the logic is handled here, we could set up one autoresponder email that allows you to send the individual section results and the overall result for the entire form to the form submitter. So even though there's only one autoresponder here, it's completely dynamic based off of the logic that's already occurring on the form itself. And just to give you an idea of how this form would function, this first version, I actually left those hidden fields visible just so we could see the functionality of the form. So if you come through here and answer these questions, you can overwrite that pass with the fail or overwrite fail with pass. And then if you pass the entire quiz, you can go ahead and see the overall result. And again, with this particular one, we could get some sections wrong. So still fail a section, but still overall pass the quiz. Or if we just get everything right, we still see that overall passing score. And here's what it would look like to the actual submitter with those fields hidden because they just run in the background and do all the logic behind the scenes. And then finally, just go ahead and skip that. That email would show the results one way or another. And let's actually see if we can get that to show. Give me 1 second. Perfect. So you can see here that if a section is passed, it'll show as passed. If a section is failed, it'll show as failed, but you could still get the overall result as passing. So with our next example, we're going to look at the enable, require, and mask field condition, as well as the skip page condition. So we can use multiple condition types on a single form. We do have another hidden field here. This one is actually that form calculation widget where we're doing an age calculation. The same exact formula was mentioned in Lauren's session last week, so feel free to check that out on our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Definitely some great information in there. But essentially, we're going to calculate the registrant's age, and then the second page asks for some parent-guardian contact information. If they are over 18, we'll skip this page entirely. If they're under 18, we'll show this page, and we'll also make these fields required. You can see they're not required now, but they will be on the form itself. We're also going to input mask this short text that we're using as a phone number field based off of the country of residence being selected. So if we look at the conditions, we have that input masking condition set up based off of the area they choose. We also have the if age is less than 18, require multiple fields. And if the age is greater than 17, skip to that last page. So this is where I was kind of saying earlier, you could do greater than 18 or equal to 18, or you can just say greater than 17. So if we actually fill out the form and enter a date of birth that is greater than 18, and we'll select our area of residence, we skip that second page altogether, and we can just use the terms and condition widget, acknowledge, and sign and submit this form. If we select an age that is under 18, we get taken to that second page, and all of those fields are now required, so I can't move on without actually putting data into these fields. Now let's look at the change thank you page condition. So this could either change the thank you page or redirect to another page altogether, and we'll kind of take a look at both parts of that condition. So this form just has a translation set up. If you're not familiar with form translations, you can go to the form settings, click on show more options, go to form languages, and set a default language, and then add your translation values to your form. So once you have translations set up, you can actually set conditions around the form language. So I could say if it's equal to French, show a custom thank you page. Or if it's equal to Spanish, show a different custom thank you page. And then, of course, if no conditions are met, it'll just be the default thank you page. So if I complete this form in English and submit, we'll see our thank you page in English. And if I complete the form in another language, like Spanish, and submit, we'll see our thank you page in Spanish. So as I mentioned, you can actually do more than just change the thank you page. So you can also redirect to another page altogether. This could be your own outside page, doesn't have to be within Jotform or Jotform Enterprise. It could also be another form though. And if you do use another form, you can pass data using URL parameters from one form to another. This one just allows for a registration for an online driving class. One of the things that the submitter has to do is choose their state of residence. So if they choose Maryland, we actually set up another form that they'll immediately get redirected to. One thing to note on this form is that you'll notice it says powered by Jotform Sign. So we are using sign automation on this form, which gives your form the same protections as an actual signed document. And that can be turned on any form where you're collecting a signature if you want. And if we go back to the conditions, it's just one, and it's based around that drop-down field. So we're saying if the state or location is equal to Maryland, then redirect to this other form, and you'll notice the URL parameters we're using to pass over the name information and the state that they chose into the address field, so they don't have to repeat their name or repeat the state. So if we fill out this form and choose Maryland as our state of residence, you'll see that we're immediately redirected. That name is passed, and I even made it read only so they can't change it. And then we also pass the state into the address so they don't have to type that. If we use one of the other states like Virginia or DC and submit the form, we'll just see the page because there's no need to redirect to that other form. All right, and let's look at that condition now, which is the change email recipient. So again, as I mentioned, it's a little bit more powerful than just changing who receives an email. You can actually change if an email sends or when it would send. In this first portion of it, I am going to change who receives an email. So there's a couple portions that are coming to play with this conditional logic. The person completing the form can select the department that they work in, and this is going to allow us to dynamically send a notification email. And the reason that we're using that notification email is that we're also collecting file uploads. So an autoresponder, which is kind of already dynamic anyways because it uses form data, doesn't allow for attaching file uploads, but a notification email does. A notification email is typically static by default. So if I were to look at the email here, it has a recipient address. However, I also have this indication that it includes conditions. So in this case, the conditional logic is going to overwrite the recipient on the notification email. So the value that's entered here doesn't really matter. There does have to be a value entered in order to set up the email, but it's going to be overwritten by the condition. So if I look at my conditional logic, it's all based around that dropdown of the department. And I'm saying if they, depending on the department they choose, send the notification email to whatever manager needs to receive it. And on the email itself, again, because I'm using a notification email instead of an autoresponder, I can put the form data in as I'd like. I can also attach a PDF, which I've created in the PDF editor, and most importantly, the file uploads that are provided by the person submitting the form. So if I come through and submit the form, I can add my file upload. I could select my department and submit the form. I'll get my thank you page, and then I'll also get the email, which confirms that the form was submitted, and I get my file upload as well as the PDF attachment. If for the final portion of this condition, we're going to look at actually dynamically sending or dynamically choosing which notification email, or in this case, autoresponder email gets sent. So I'm going to jump back to that form that had a translation on it. And you'll probably notice that when I reviewed that form and looked at the conditions, there were a couple more than what I highlighted just a second ago. And that's going to be these conditions around the email. So again, because I have that translation set up, I can set conditions around that. And what I've done is created different autoresponder emails for each language. And I'm basically saying, depending on the form language, send to the appropriate version of the autoresponder email. So I have 3 different autoresponder emails set up, one for each language that just has some basic text in it. That'll be translated depending on the language. And then it also attaches a PDF, which I've also created in the PDF editor. So I have more than one version. Each has a translation where I've translated the labels so they match the language that the data would have been inputted in. So even though I have 3 different autoresponder emails, because it says includes condition, every submission is not going to trigger all 3 emails. It's going to be dependent on the form language that was used to submit the form. So if I take a look at this form and submit it in English, and we'll just go ahead and add some information here. Hit sign. I get my thank you page. And again, just as we discussed, you could change the thank you page. So I see my thank you page in the appropriate language. And if I take a look at the email I receive, I get the email in the language that I submitted the form in. Wow, so we really did cover a lot in today's session. As you can see, conditional logic is a powerful feature that really enables you to take your forms to the next level, whether it be showing and hiding fields and skipping certain pages of a form to tailor the experience to the needs of your submitter, or dynamically changing a thank you page or email based on selections made by the user. There are endless opportunities to enhance your forms through the use of conditions. I encourage you to take what we've discussed today and apply it to your own system to see how you can further improve the efficiency of your process. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A if you have not done so already. So let's take a look at some of those questions. So we have one here. Is there a limit to the number of conditions that can be added to a form? While there isn't a hard limit on the number of conditions, the logic will run anytime the form is accessed. So if you start to add like hundreds or multiples of hundreds of conditions to your form, the form will still work and the conditional logic will still function, but the user may experience some slowness, certainly depending on the other widgets involved on the form or any other factors that might be kind of affecting the performance of the form. But generally speaking, there is not a limit to the number of conditions. You can add them as you need them. Certainly, a longer form will definitely have more conditions added over time. Let's see. Not seeing any other questions right now. Marketing, do we have any questions from the YouTube side?
Nothing currently from the YouTube side.
Okay, perfect. Looks like we did get one more. How did the emails get translated? Is that through Jotform? So the emails themselves aren't translated through Jotform. Let's see find which form that was. So the emails themselves aren't translated through Jotform. I just did those translations manually. So you'll just want to manually add those translations. Same with the PDF. If you do set up translations, though, gets a little bit off topic of conditions, but I'll just go ahead and mention it. If you don't change the label of the fields around too much, the translation will be done for you. So you'll notice the actual fields being translated here. But the emails themselves, you want to set up your own translation for. Is there an else option to the condition? So there isn't an else portion of the condition. It's kind of if the condition is met, then take this action, otherwise do the opposite action. So if you want to kind of get into an else portion of the condition, you could set up a second condition to kind of account for that else statement, but there isn't a true if else statement the way you would see in like a coding language maybe. So definitely great questions. Anything else that I could answer for anybody? All right.
Hey, it looks
Well,
like
in that,
I was gonna
yeah.
say, sorry, it looks like a comment just came through on YouTube actually. Let me pull it up really quick. Oh, and now the chat. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So one question from YouTube is, um, are you able to retrieve data if the same person submits the form? I'm not sure if that's a complete question now that I look at it.
uh, yeah, so all of your submissions will show in the submission table. So anytime the form is submitted, it'll be a unique line item in the submission table or a new submission in the inbox. Um, but yeah, if there's a second part to that question, feel free to throw it in there and send it my way. But generally speaking, yeah, if somebody submits a form, each individual submission will be viewable in the table. Every submission is its own kind of unique identity. Cool. Okay. Well, I do want to thank you all again for being here with me today. Our next session together is on Wednesday, July 10th, and Stephanie will be back discussing the reporting capabilities within Jotform Enterprise and how you can use the submission data collected from your forms to set up slide-based visual reports, reports that can be embedded, as well as automated digest emails. If you have any questions that we didn't get to today, please reach out to our enterprise sales team or to our awesome customer support team if you're already an enterprise user. You can find more Lunch and Learns, webinars, walkthroughs, and quick video guides on our YouTube channel and our website. We will have some great Lunch and Learn sessions coming up that will build upon each other. So please ensure that you're registered for those sessions at jotform.com/enterprise/lunch and learn sessions. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye.